I mean, I can almost feel the anger, Norman. We've been here so many times over 15 or odd years talking about this. It's another set of stats. They are grim, they are devastating, and they are lethal, disproportionately to young people. What the heck is going on?
Well, you're right, Ian. What I should have done is about 25 years ago, as a serving police officer, having been stabbed myself and challenged a number of other people with knives, received another injury. Fortunately, it wasn't life-threatening like the first one. I should have made a CD, the sort of CD you listen to in a Spanish hotel as you enter the reception, because as you enter the reception, you get to know every single song in sequence. And that's how I feel about knife crime. It's killed many, many people. It's devastated many lives. It's maimed many people. And what's as worrying, and again, like when I was a police officer 30 years ago, stood up and said, we're looking at an epidemic. A few years ago, I said, not only are we in an epidemic, we are now having children murdering other children. And in London 3 years ago, we had the highest number of child homicides by knives against other children. And what's been done about it? What's been done about it in 30, 35 years? I'll tell you, it's a big fat zero.
What's the rationale here, Norman? Everybody, every politician, not all, but pretty much most politicians, I should correct myself, we'll talk about devastation, they'll talk about how it's unacceptable, they'll talk about how they want to do more to address this. But these are the same words, empty words, as it turns out. Nothing ever really seems to happen. I'm not aware of any big initiative that has increased penalties for things like carrying a knife. How often have we talked about that one? Go to jail for 5 years the first time you're caught carrying. Never happens, not even the second time, third time carrying a knife. Even people who've used a knife are not going to jail. So there's that as well. But there is this other sense that the word normalization is being used a lot today. And I feel really strongly that is applicable not just to knife crime, but more worryingly to knife crime, but also shoplifting and things like that, where there is a sense that what was once the most horrendous crime you could imagine is now largely ignored. We see it so often. We see it on the front pages. We hear about it on the radio and the television, and then we move along. And then 2 days later, there's another story. We've almost normalised crime to the point that we don't care.
There's not much more that can be done. I've been up to number 10 Downing Street a number of times, Buckingham Palace, handing letters into the Queen when I was a serving officer, because the government weren't listening at the time. I went up to Tony Blair, David Cameron, you name it, all of them. I've highlighted the devastation of knife crime and what needs to be done. We need 5-year mandatory prison sentencing, and we need mass stop and search. Well, we are told that the prisons are full, not to send people to prison up to 1 year. Prisoners are being released up to 2 months early, but most of them would have got a very lenient sentence anyway, plus their crimes would have been so serious and so persistent. They're the types of people society needs protecting from the most, so they get short sentences, they're released earlier. And then when we see violent crimes such as knife crime that we're discussing now, nobody seems to get a grip on it. If we had a mandatory prison sentence of 5 years, Ian, I am telling you now, and I know the criminal justice system inside out, 45 years, 31 of those has been a serving police officer. I am Britain's independent lead campaigner on knife crime, which means I'm in bed with no political party. So what I tell you is from experience and my expert view, or certainly my independent expert view, is that if we had 5-year mandatory sentences for those that carry a knife on the streets without lawful authority or reasonable excuse, which is what the wording of the Act is I'm telling you, within a year or two, knife crime will be revered by those that actually carry them as much as gun crime. Because if you carry a gun on the streets of Britain, it's a minimum of a 5-year mandatory sentence. You're more likely to be stabbed to death 3 times more than be shot to death. Yeah, if you carry a knife, you can still get a sentence equivalent to a parking ticket.
Yep.
Now, you tell me the sense in that, Ian.
Is it because, I mean, we hear often the arguments about a lack of prison places, and we absolutely know now that whether it's magistrates, but mostly judges in Crown courts, that clearly are instructed or informed that, look, if you can give a non-custodial sentence out, then that would be preferable because we just ain't got the prison places. Assuming that is true, which I think it probably is, because I can't think of any other rational explanation as to why you wouldn't be jailing people for stabbing, then the answer is obvious. Firstly, you build more prisons. I think there's one big one and still being built, seems to be going on forever, but just build more after that. But then you mentioned stop and search, you increase that, and you absolutely do what you said right at the beginning, Norman, and that is that you would increase the sentence you would get for the first time of carrying a knife. Now, I'm not a criminologist, but I've never been a cop. I speak to people like yourself, Norman, who know this turf well. I cannot believe, as a reasonably intelligent bloke, that everything I've just said is beyond the wit of mankind.
It isn't. The reason why that I bang on so much, and I talk about it more now than I ever did, is one early morning, I was an area car driver, and I was assisting the Met Police in Chelsea, and a burglar had burgled 3 properties with a knife, which meant that had he been disturbed, he possibly would have murdered the householder. You don't carry a knife unless you intend to use it. I actually chased him in the dark hours, and he put that blade deep into my chest, and I very nearly died. I was a young police officer with my life ahead of me, just like many other people are, just like many kids nowadays. And it changed my life. It devastated my life. So I stood up, even as a serving police officer, and I said, we've got to do something about knife crime. I don't want people to go through what I'm going through. And for 35 years, I've been speaking to people like you. I haven't just gobbed off about it. I've actually researched it. I know the effects, I know the psychology, I know the law, I know the sentencing guidelines. I'm 65 years of age now. I was 30 then. And I just hope that one day before I die, that I can actually try and make someone in power listen to what needs to be done, because I know the devastation of knife crime, hence I'm talking to you now. And nothing ever happens. I tell the government, 5 years imprisonment, it will make a big difference. And the question society should ask, and I meet all these families that are bereft in mortuaries with their child only 6 feet away, 14 or 15 years of age. Parents are planning funerals instead of bright futures. So the question I ask the government, and probably Labour that's going to come in, at what price do you put the safety of people on the streets of Britain, where knife crime is at an epidemic level, and it destroys lives that can never be brought back? It's the parents and the loved ones that face the true life sentence for the rest of their lives, while often the offender is released. At what price, financial price, are we prepared to pay to save lives as far as knife crime is concerned? And sadly, I haven't seen a government in 45 years of policing and law and order that has taken this issue seriously, Ian.
Spot on, spot on. Norman, we finish on that point. I can hear the passion, but I can also hear the resignation in your voice there as well.